Hi, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Ross.
Today we're going to talk about 4 different ways that the church can relate to the city. This week we want to talk a little bit about if we as a community of faith, as the people of God, have been placed here in Evansville for a reason. How do we pursue that reason? What can our engagement in the city look like as a body of believers?
That's a great question, and it makes a really important assumption that we need to point out, which is that it's important to actually engage the city. There's a pastor out in California who helps kind of churches come together and work together for the city. His name is Roger Valsey. He actually says if a church doesn't cast the city in their vision, meaning it's not part of who we are, it doesn't come into focus in our ultimate objective, then it's questionable whether that is really a church, because God plants churches to reach whole cities. So that's a really big thing to just sit and think about. And then we're also going to talk about these 4 cultural engagement kind of perspectives that churches often have, or you can have as an individual or a small group, or just your mentality. So why don't you tell us about the first one?
So the first one I think is pretty common, and that is to just kind of withdraw, isolate yourself, treat your church as like a fortress from culture,
like
from
put
the
the
city.
walls up.
Put the walls
this is
up.
where we have a safe place.
Yes, we're going to protect ourselves from the influences of culture, the influence of our city. And to some degree, you don't want to be influenced heavily by the city or the culture, which is what we'll talk about in a minute. But at the same time, if the church is isolating itself and withdrawing from the city, then what we see is the city ends up like Babylon. It ends up being a city that's not influenced at all by the people of God or by God's standards and design for the way that we should live.
Another way is if the faithful presence of the church is totally unrecognizable because the church has assimilated totally to the culture. And this is another way that we can respond as the church, is to just completely adopt what's going on in culture and to say, we love you so much that we just accept you. Then the city starts to influence the church so much that there is no church, really. The faithful expression of who Jesus is and what it means to follow him becomes really hard to see.
And I think sometimes the third one is a reaction against that. We want to make sure that we are not isolated from the city, that we are having an impact on the city, but we don't want to be influenced.
Become the city.
We don't want to become the city. And so we need to sort of do cultural warfare and make sure that God's standards win. And either the church gets viewed in this really negative light and kind of gets ignored, or if the church does win the culture war, it isolates those who are outside of Christ or are far from the church.
Kind of alienates them.
It alienates them, and so it doesn't achieve the purposes of God in reaching those who are lost and far from God.
And we can see all 3 of those kind of cultural engagement strategies probably in our own lives even, but definitely in churches. And there's a 4th one that we would talk about, this idea of what does it look like to love the city? And when you say that, all 3 of those other approaches go, well, we are trying to love the city. We think this is the best way. But we have to look at the results and what does it mean? And so it's a really hard, difficult thing to process and sort out. What does it mean to love the city for our community of faith, for me as an individual? It might look different for everybody, but it has the transformative idea where we are faithfully present in the city in order to see it become more and more like the New Jerusalem, more and more like heaven coming to earth in every channel of culture. So arts, business, education, government, media, healthcare, social sector, nonprofits, church leaders, etc. The church is actually faithfully present in all those places right now.